Okay, good morning, everyone. It's as Chief Executive of One Nucleus. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Building Life Science Adventures. I guess everybody's career is, I've always felt opportunistic, but ideally it's an adventure as well, because that's the most fun. So I'm looking forward to the panels over the next few days, just sharing insights from their own perspective and their own organizations about what creates great careers, not just jobs. And I think everybody has aspirations. You may not stay with the same employer, but actually you want your career to be fulfilling and rewarding. And we're in a sector that gives you ample opportunity for that, both in diversity of opportunity and role, but also in the aspirations of really changing people's lives, which the sector does on a rolling basis. So I go to many careers fairs and jobs fairs, and it's all about handing out CVs and looking at what makes a great CV and discussing how you can make yourself attractive to companies. Do I go to enough where the question is, what makes a great job advert or what makes a great career? Probably not within that organization. So that's what I'm looking forward to over the next few days. On the housekeeping front for attendees, then if you could keep your microphones off while the panel's engaging with each other, and it'll come to Q&A after that, that'll be appreciated. In terms of video, you can feel free to have your video on or off. It's entirely your choice. If you pop questions into the chat box, then the moderator will be able to see them and work those into the dialogue if they're appropriate at that point in time, or come back to them. And just to say that there is closed captions enabled for those who require that accessibility. So without more from me, I'm going to hand over to Tom Froggatt from Singular to moderate the first session. Tom, over to you.
Thanks very much, Tony. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this first session of the day. We were given a pretty broad brief for this session on the recipe for success. I think, as Tony's touched on, there's not one recipe for career success, but what we wanted to do this morning was share some of the experiences of our panel here, right, in terms of how they've built their careers and the things that have been particularly important to them, particularly around the skills they've developed and the expertise they've developed over the years. But also they're all, I believe, employers in their own right. And so we're going to talk a little bit, hopefully at the end, if we have some time, about what they look for in candidates. And that may help you to prepare for the next time that you go and look for your next step in this adventure. We'll start with a few introductions. I'll introduce myself and then we'll go around. So my name's Tom Froggatt. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Singular, and we work with biotech companies, particularly startup and early stage biotech companies, on hiring and people issues. So we work with them on how they grow, we work with them on recruitment campaigns, and we work with them on how they retain and engage their employees. And so I personally have spent the last almost 18 years now working with hundreds of companies and thousands of job candidates as they build their teams and build their careers. We put a lot of emphasis on working with people through their careers as well and helping support people's careers. So we do a lot of work around what drives people's careers, what employers look for. And so I live in this question every day. So I'm not going to talk loads on this panel, but I will try and contribute here and there, because we've got some people here who've got some really interesting viewpoints to share. So I will pass on to Flic. If you could introduce yourself and tell people a bit about a very brief overview of your career, that'd be great.
Yes. So I'm Flic Gabbay. I joined the pharmaceutical industry as a pharmaceutical physician rather a long time ago. And before that, I was working in clinical medicine, in obstetrics and gynecology. And I started in big pharma, where I was predominantly working in research and development, which basically I was working from just preclinical up to around about phase 3. And I worked both in the US and in the UK, and was fortunate enough to get experience at board level as well, which was really quite exciting. And I spent 10 years in Park Davis. After a little while, I had to come back from the US for family reasons, and I set up a CRO. I didn't seem to fit in most UK companies. They were rather more conventional than working in the US. And that we sold to PPD, was the first CRO they bought outside the US. So I started off working mainstream pharma and then moved into the service sector. Then I went back into R&D, became a CEO of a couple of small biotechs. And that was interesting. And I also had the opportunity to learn to be a chair of the board rather than actually actively working within the biotech itself. In 2008, I was persuaded to set up another company, which is tranScrip, and that has now about 80 employees, and it's a consultancy. It mostly does R&D and early development for biotechs and provides virtual teams of people to help where resources needed. But you may be slightly surprised to know that where a lot of the resources needed is big pharma, and some 40% of tranScrip's revenue comes from big pharma with teams that are fielded there. So, I am less involved with that now, in that I was leading it as the managing partner. But I am now doing less of that. I am actually president of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine, looking after pharmaceutical physicians in their early careers, and representing pharmaceutical medicine in the Royal Colleges in the UK and with the Chief Medical Officer's office and so on. I'm also on the Council of the Academy of Medical Sciences, where we do a lot of mentoring of scientists coming into all aspects of medical science and all aspects of collaboration. And I have some university roles and non-exec roles as well that I do. So you might think I had retired, but nobody in my family does.
Fair enough. Thank you for that, Flic, and lots of different perspectives that you can look at careers from during the course of this panel. So looking forward to getting into that. Just to say to the audience, by the way, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to have access to a Q&A panel here, but I can't see it anywhere. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. That's the way that I'll be able to see them. Cathie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Yeah, great. Hi, I'm Cathie Mackay. I've worked in the pharma-related industry pretty much all my life, apart from 1 year for Shell. So I kind of, if you kind of cut my wrist, I would probably bleed pharmaceutical in some way. I've spent a lot of my time in the support element of pharma. So I was an environmental professional to start with, and I ended up starting with a very small advisory job writing safety data sheets. So whenever you have to look up a safety data sheet, that's what I spent my life doing. It wasn't a job I dreamed of, but it was the first job that came up that really excited me, because it was in the pharma industry. I didn't know a lot about it. I went for my first interview and I just knew that was the kind of place I wanted to spend my time in, because of the purpose and the connectedness with people and health and well-being and making a difference to people's lives, and the connection that gave me as a person with my kind of calling to get involved with environmental matters. So the kind of moons aligned. I'd like to say I designed it, but it was just luck. But once I got in there, I then just went through a series of jobs over the next 25 plus years, where I got involved in R&D. I led support teams in terms of environment, health and safety to support commercial people internationally, manufacturing. I headed up the central group, setting up EHS reporting systems and management systems, and really just kind of moved my career around. And I led the occupational health group as well for a while, and had just an amazing experience of learning. And one of my deepest satisfactions probably throughout it all was, as I moved into management and leadership positions, was how I could have the pleasure of hiring great people, but also supporting them on their development journey. I led an environment, health and safety international future leaders program, where we took graduates who had never really heard of environment, health and safety, because a lot of people obviously don't do that as their degree. They might be chemists, they might be biologists, biochemists, and brought them on and brought them into great people who enabled, particularly I'd say in R&D, great science on very novel compounds where there is very little information or data, how they could do that safely for themselves, everyone else, and the ecotoxicity related to it. But throughout all that, I also got a love for coaching. So I developed my coaching skills, and then over the last couple of years, I've transitioned out of the pharma industry and set up my own company, CoSpring, which provides coaching and leadership services to individuals, be they emerging leaders or existing leaders, supporting them on their growth journey, and also providing any consultancy support needed on EHS, particularly developing EHS professionals or people who need to understand more about it, but still really kind of trying to work closely with the sector I love. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cathie. And last but not least, Mark, can you tell us a bit about you and your career?
Happy to, Tom. And I can see, I always knew you were a rock star, but I can now see it's not just a metaphor from your background there, unless it's some sort of fake thing you put up and confuse it.
Yeah, this isn't real. This isn't real.
Yeah, so I'm Mark. I started off as an academic many years ago, and then both here in the UK and then moved to Switzerland. But I always worked with industry. My PhD was funded by American Merck, and I worked with the 3 Swiss companies when I was in Basel. Obviously, that dates me when there were 3 Swiss companies. This is pre-Novartis. And then I was invited to join Pfizer to set up a new therapeutic area head, actually in Institute of Neurology in London. And then from there left to set up a series of biotech companies, which have been from early stage foundation through to trade sale, licensing, or some other, return to shareholders, and probably generated about $1.5 billion in value in terms of BioWorld dollars, not real money, I hasten to add. More recently, I've got involved with the Biotechnology Institute in Cambridge, and this is actually to do with the Biotechnology Business Institute in Barcelona. Started over 10 years ago now, and offer the first life sciences MBA. And the reason I got involved was a lot of people have said to me, I've done this MBA, it's great, I really enjoyed it. I did it at the Judge Business School, the Side Business School, or wherever it's Cass. The problem is only 10% of it is relevant to life sciences. 90% of it was telling me stuff I never knew I was going to do because I'd want to have a career in life sciences. And so we thought, well, perhaps there's a market here. There is a life sciences MBA at Harvard, but as far as we were, there isn't another one in Europe. And so what we're doing is really reprogramming scientists who want to willingly move away from science and into business. So we are exposing them to the dark side of the force, and they seem to be enjoying it. But pleasure to be here, and hopefully get involved in some of the discussions.
Fabulous. Well, that will probably give you plenty of material for this conversation, Mark, the work you've been doing with that. So welcome to our panel. Thank you all for joining us. And as you can see, lots of different career paths here, just between the three of them. And I'm sure that'll give them some different perspectives on things as well. To start with, I'm going to start with Cathie, and then I'm going to ask everybody this question. For you personally, Cathie, what do you think have been the most critical, I suppose, skills, competencies, lessons you've learned over the course of your career that have allowed you to be successful?
I'll just pick out a few because obviously there's a lot. First thing I'd like to pull up is adaptability and flexibility. So what I learned was having a set view on what I thought I wanted to do or what I thought I wanted to be was really not helpful. Being very clear on the type of work I wanted to do in sense of fulfillment, challenge, those kind of things. But in terms of a strongly defined pathway, I personally didn't feel that was helpful. I be a little more opportunistic. I like to have my eyes open, and I like to almost grab opportunities that just tickled my curiosity, and put my all in that, and I found it made it work for me. I was flexible in terms of location. I moved where I needed to go. Fortunately for me, in terms of that, wasn't massively disruptive. It was pretty much kind of different places around the UK, and when I had global roles, it didn't matter where I was based. But I'd say adaptability and flexibility was key. Another area around clear and succinct communications. So looking back early in my career, I was probably quite talkative and a lot of information came out, but not necessarily in a coherent way. And I remember sometimes being quite frustrated in some meetings in that I felt I'd made a point, but nobody heard. And so I'd like say it again in my mind, but still nobody heard. And then other people's, what I felt like great ideas got picked up. And looking back on that and what I learned was that I wasn't putting my point across clearly enough or succinctly enough. So that would be a second area. And the third area, just to mention, and then we'll move on, is around attention to detail. And that's about knowing when it's really important and doing it brilliantly, but also knowing when 80-20 rule is all you need to move on. And again, probably early in my career, I got that wrong a number of times. But as you move through into more management and leadership positions where you're making important decisions, really key to know when enough is enough, and being comfortable with not always having all the information, but having enough to make a good judgment. Yeah.
Interesting. And I think your point around adaptability and flexibility is a really interesting one, Cathie, because I think, you know, a lot of people start out, not everybody, but a lot of people start out with an idea of what their career is going to look like.
Sure.
And very few plans survive contact with the real world, right?
Exactly.
But as you touched on, it can be hard for people to break out of that model that they had, and as a result, you miss opportunities potentially, and you can miss out on things that might be good for your career going forward. So, was there anything that you particularly did to foster that sense of adaptability, or to sort of break out of that set view of what your career should be?
I would say always being curious. So it's rather than trying to say I must stop doing something, which is always really difficult, I tried to really dial up my curiosity, normally through people. So if somebody came up and said, hey, there's this new role, would you like to do it? Rather than form a judgment about it, it would be, tell me more about it. What will it look and feel like? And, you know, if they've done it, you know, what was it like? Or tell me somebody who's done something like that. Or if I did that, what would it give me? How would I be a bigger, different shaped person? You know, so it's the word curiosity for me is don't make a judgment too early. Be curious, ask lots of questions, figure out the so what about it, and then maybe make a judgment, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really important. And Mark, same question to you. What have been the most important things that you've developed over the course of your career?
I think being a bit bloody minded, actually, because I mean, it's such a difficult profession we're in. You know, most things fail in life sciences, right? You know, and as scientists, we realize that experiments are experiments, they're not fact. And actually, you have to cope with a lot of failure, right? You know, 90% of the R&D we do in our sector gets written off. And most people would give up. In any other industry, you give up. But I think it's the mission. We are here to improve human quality of life and human health, and just keep on going. It doesn't mean you have to be linear in your thinking. You can obviously duck and dive and change direction. But I think it's persevere. It's not for the faint-hearted. And I think one of the things we do in the BBI is not sugarcoat it, because a lot of things you get is, oh, it's going to be great, it's wonderful. You go on these accelerator courses, and it's just so easy to start a business, isn't it? You know, and you know, everyone thinks it's like being an influencer selling cosmetics on the internet, and it's not. It's very difficult. It's very R&D intensive, and they're huge technology challenges. But I think if you've got the stamina for it, go for it, because I think there are very few things you can do in life that give you so much back. So I think, you know, actually, you know, having worked on a drug at Pfizer that my mother and my uncle took was probably, for me, you know, very rewarding, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting point around, you know, starting a business that, you know, whether you start a business or whether you're leading a team, I think it applies equally, but you sort of, your level of success is really forged in those times when things aren't going according to plan, right? And when things aren't going well.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's all about disruptive change, because our industry is grotesquely inefficient, right? I mean, no other industry would put up with the very high attrition rate that we see. And, you know, we talk about, you know, I've been around enough where we've talked about it, you know, latest buzzword is artificial intelligence. I was going to say artificial insemination there. Sorry, that was a bit of a Freudian slip. But basically, you know, AI is, but, you know, I remember when we were talking about IBM and Motorola, and now we're talking about social media companies. You know, these technologies come in waves and they do make a difference. Obviously, you know, a lot of excitement around RNA-based technologies, which is great. You know, particularly we've all seen how many companies have produced life-saving vaccines based on RNA technology, which has made the production of vaccines infinitely more effective and you know, in moving forward. And the UK, you know, has been fantastic in playing a part in that journey. But I do think, you know, we do get talked up with what's the latest buzzword, what's the latest hype, you know, and our industry is not about social media. It's about hard quality science and really bright people. It's not about selling advertising. It's about having the best bright minds, being persevering and going and taking it through to the end, or die trying, basically.
Yeah, interesting. So again, that comes back to that bloody mindedness in some ways, right? It's remaining focused on what's important rather than everything else that's going on.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of noise out there, and it's actually, you know, it's very easy to get distracted. Yeah. And I think, you know, you do need to listen, you do need to take things in, but if you listen too much, you know, all you're going to end up is in constant indecision, which is not healthy for you or the people you're working with.
Yes, absolutely. And Flic, the same question to you in terms of the things that have been most important in your career.
I think different things in different phases and different things in different settings. There are some settings in which being bloody minded would have been very challenging. But there are other settings, which I totally agree with Mark, where actually you really do have to be critical around and sometimes take decisions that are not popular, and especially if you rise to the point where you're leading a team where clearly you're coming to a dead end and the team really don't want to stop, you can end up wasting an awful lot of time. And that's not just in terms of science. There can be all sorts of projects. In the service sector, you might be trying to sell a piece of support for pharma that actually nobody wants. You have to be able to recognize that that is a pointless exercise. But I think the most important thing to me was being grounded in science and being patient enough to learn your discipline before you become promoted. When I joined pharma in Park Davis, I was one of 2 women in 200 managers.
Wow.
And the other one was married to the chairman's son. And it was quite a challenge to actually manage. And I frequently was not promoted. And I asked one day why I was not promoted. And they said, well, because you're too good at your job. And as you become a manager, you actually do get promoted out of it. However, actually, in the end, it was extremely valuable to me because I had, compared to some of my male colleagues, a couple more years of really learning my trade. And I think that was an extremely useful thing. And I can see Mark smiling, but we both probably were in the industry where a lot of senior managers had an average spell in their job of maybe 1 or 2 years before they actually walked out the door. Right. Because of some scientific or clinical catastrophe that we just weren't trained then to do. So I think, you know, the life sciences MBA, proper training in pharmaceutical medicine and so on is invaluable. And I guess I would say that. The support from mentoring and coaching and things like that is extremely helpful. It wasn't something perhaps that was around when I was in the first part of my career, but the appraisal systems that medicine has brought in and so on are extremely useful to have somebody to talk to once a year and sort of evaluate where you're going, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I love Edison's saying, you know, how was he successful? And he said hard work, stick-attitiveness, and common sense. And I think those three things, they always resonate with me. You know, nothing comes easy.
Yes.
And when it does come, as Mark says, it's enormously rewarding. And, you know, there's nothing, you get no bigger kick than getting a drug registered. It's the whole organization just has, it's like winning the World Cup.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's an interesting thing to pick up on there. I think I asked about skills and competencies that you've developed, but I think one of the things that people often overlook that you've talked about there is developing the tendency to develop yourself, right? And to spend time working on yourself and developing expertise, as you talked about, and learning the skills. It sounds like that's been important for you.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, obviously, you have to look at career opportunities, but don't let them play above what you do well. So don't say, oh, I'm going to go to this bigger job because I'll get a bigger salary and it's got a bigger title. It's about achieving what you can achieve. And in pharma, those things for a lot of places now, especially where we've got such a disparate kind of set of organizations, small biotechs, consultancies, big pharma, regulatory consultancies and agencies. There's an enormous range of kinds of organizations that you can work in, and find out what suits you.
Absolutely. The other point I wanted to pick up on there, Flic, was the first one that you made, which was about knowing when to give up on things, knowing when to let things go and move on, which I think you're right. I think, you know, clearly there's a cost associated to that with research that you're doing, but outside of research, it applies as well.
As well, absolutely.
Any advice for knowing when to give up and how you know that? Because some things take persistence as well, right? And it's about finding that balance.
It's the combination of hard work and common sense. Sit down with a pen and paper and figure out what's important, what's not important, and where these things fit. So personally, or even on a project, and we've in tranScrip, we've had a couple of projects that actually the agencies really should have supported, and they didn't. And would have met a huge medical need. We probably could have battled through and got the indication that would have been really valuable. But, you know, in the end, they might say no, and you could have wasted a huge amount of money going there. And really, so just being able to see the longer game and figure out what is the chances of you achieving this.
Yes.
Because you can't, I'm going to say a story about Pfizer when Park Davis and Pfizer were just before they merged. Park Davis had about 12 compounds in phase 2 and 3 that we were focusing on. Pfizer had 75. Was incredibly successful, but every time they got so far with a project, they had enough opportunity to move on to another one. And sometimes, and that actually slowed things down. And of course, after the merger, the huge sort of spread of trimming of things and so on. But that drive, when you've got only 1 or 2 compounds, actually helps biotech. One-horse companies are extremely risky, but on the other hand, the drive is much more intense than if you're in a big company and you've got 50-odd compounds in early development.
No, absolutely. And I suppose the tendency to hold on to things perhaps might be. Yeah.
I mean, it is important to know, though, that some of those things, you have to move on. And as Mark says, sometimes they have to be, they have to be go to trade sale, they have to do something else. And you can't just drift on endlessly.
Yes.
So, and that is life too.
True. We've only got so much time, otherwise we dive into that. So I want to sort of shift gears a little bit and maybe get you guys to think about this from an employer's perspective, and Mark, maybe in terms of the work you're doing with the Institute as well. I'm going to start with you, Mark, because you touched on this a little bit earlier in that there's always new trends in technology and they're important and they make a difference. That goes for science as well. There are new things that you need to learn all the time, and developing I don't know, a neuroscience drug now is not the same as it will be in 5 years, and so you're going to need to learn different skills. I think that's inherent in this sort of career. Outside of the technical skills, though, I'm interested to understand from the point of view of you as an employer, perhaps, what are the softer skills, the other competencies, that are less prevalent and maybe rarer in people in the industry today, but valuable, and B, that you look for as an employer? I imagine there's probably an overlap between these two things. And just a bit of context on this, I think this applies up and down the career path. I was reading an article yesterday about how actually the selection criteria for CEOs of public companies has changed significantly over the last 5 years, moving from a real focus on financial control and operational effectiveness to people skills, leadership, PR and marketing, and actually those softer skills that have developed. So even at the top of companies, these things are becoming more and more important, changing. So Mark, skills, competencies outside of technical skills, what have you seen as rare and important?
Well, I think companies would be so easy to run if they weren't full of people, wouldn't it? I mean, that's
and the customers,
the hardest part. Yeah, well, and customers, but customers are people too. Also, so I think you're absolutely right, and I mean, I think the way we deal with people is so much more sophisticated and grown up than we did when I was young. Just the way people were fired. We called it fired in those days. This is before Alan Sugar, right? People were just summarily dismissed, and there was no career plan. And I think for me, the biggest change I've seen, and I defer here to my female colleagues here, is that actually I think women have a lot more emotional intelligence and think around problems. Sort of go into the sort of, often, not all men, obviously, and I'm not stereotyping here, we're focused on the task, we get it done at all cost. And I do think seeing more women coming up to the profession in senior chair positions and so on, I think is hugely positive. I mean, when I was an academic, I can't think of a single female professor on that age, largely because in those days, and this is not just a sort of major university, it was very difficult if you wanted to have children or whatever. That was the most productive period when you were actually producing your papers, and it was a very hard. So when I moved to Pfizer, actually, I was very pleased to see a lot of female directors who were extremely good and very capable, which academia in those days, they were just very, very rare. And I think it's how do you deal with people? How do you actually get the best out of your people? How do you stimulate debate that doesn't go on for too long, and how do you guide people? So I would say one thing is some form of emotional intelligence, and I defer to my female colleagues here is to say, is that just my illusion that you guys are so much better at it than we are? I think men are very good at certain aspects, but I think, having women on boards and having women in high positions in companies, in my view, has been a hugely positive step that I've seen transformed over the last 20 years.
Either of you want to comment on that?
I'll have to jump in. I have to.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mark. So I think building on it, taking maybe a different angle, but probably on the same topic. I think it's about taking your whole self to work. And as you say, to actually initially get a job, people are very focused on what your technical skills, what do you study at university, what posts have you had before, what research have you done, have you worked in this therapeutic area before, etc. And that's great, but that isn't enough to be successful in your job. And so for me, I talk about sprinkling the art over the science, right? Science is your roots, it's what you've trained in and what you know. But in terms of either whether you get the job or whether you're successful in the job, it's not only executing your scientific knowledge in an effective way, but to Mark's point, it's, well, who are you doing that with? Who are you bringing on board? Why should anyone listen to you? Is anyone following you? Is anybody confident enough to challenge you? Because all of these things, if you're either leading a group or contributing to a group in a way which is stifling contribution of others, you are not going to have the most optimal outcome as a group, right? Likewise, if you're not confident enough to speak up because you don't think your voice will be heard, your great idea is never going to get aired. So those are just, some very obvious and practical examples. And linked to that, when I talk about kind of sprinkling the art on the science, bringing your whole self to work, it's every element of your resourcefulness as a person, playing to your strengths and using them, not letting the things you're less good at paralyze you so you can't contribute. No one's good at everything. We all know that. And so focusing and leveraging up so you really can be your best person in your role, to do it to your best capability. And you can't ask yourself of any more of that. Then you relax, and then you're probably much more effective in your role. So it's an element of giving yourself the best chance by actually being you in a complete sense, and thinking about all the elements of who you are and how you can use them in that situation to really do whatever it is you're trying to do successfully. So I think that's key.
Yeah.
There's another area that I'd like to draw out, because it was something that I always valued very much. And it's actually maybe a slightly boring word. So I'd say reliability. Now, that maybe means different things to different people. But if there's someone in your group that you can go to, you can give the task to, you can trust them implicitly to do it well, ask if they really don't know, and bring great people with them, that is the person you want on your team. That is the person you want as your second in command. And if you get to be second in command in a group, then if you do great things, you can soon be first in command, right? So don't underestimate being a reliable, trusted person that other people can depend upon. It goes a long way. So I'll maybe pause now, let other people contribute.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Just to your first point as well, there's quite a lot of self-awareness that's required for some of that. So developing that is important, I think.
It is, and it maybe just it starts very simply at, what are your values? What is important to you in life generally? How does that translate to work? And once you've figured that out, then you align yourself either with teams, people, even companies. They've all got slightly different cultures, but it's around, do I fit here? And can I get that sense of belonging?
Yeah.
Once we know we fit and we kind of belong, then all our great technical skills we can ramp up. But if we feel slightly uncomfortable, we don't really feel welcome, or we just don't tune in with the way the company is being run, we will never do our great work.
Absolutely. And Flic?
I think one of the things that is most important, it builds on understanding yourself and is being able to manage change. Because every environment that we work in now undergoes change. It may be scientific change, like trends that Mark was referring to. It may be different groups of people from very different cultures coming together, some of whom are very resistant to change, and you have to adapt yourself to supporting them, and build a culture that actually allows, the more and more diverse, and I don't just mean in terms of race and gender, but in terms of the way we approach science, the whole philosophy of science, and so on, the more we have to adapt to change. And also, I think one of the things we're not always terribly good at is remembering that what we're doing is for the world out there, for public health, global public health. And that is changing dramatically from an economic perspective, from regional perspectives, all sorts of things. So understanding the environment around you and how that's changing is really important, and is sometimes has been, I would say, some of the most difficult things I've had to deal with. And I think that there are several people in pharma I know who are big into things like philosophy of science. And when I joined pharma, you could actually see philosophy of science in action. What was happening in France was very French. What was happening in Germany and the UK was very Popperian and very, very straightforward. It was something that you could get your head around. Now we've brought them all into one big melting pot, and that makes life quite difficult, because apart from having to understand the variability around you, you also have to somehow adapt to fit, which goes to Cathie's point, that you can't just say, is this environment going to fit me? You've got to try and understand how you can best adapt to that and give your best. And I think those sort of skills, I was fortunate enough to be brought up in US pharma in the US when there was a lot of MBA stuff going on about how we manage that. And that was extremely valuable. And I hope, Mark, that some of that is coming back in the MBAs about, how people interact in science to make things go forward in life sciences, because I thought it was really valuable to me.
No, exactly, and we do actually have a lot of sort of psychology in there, so I sort of teach a bit on decision theory, which I'm quite keen on, but then we have people talking about how you can use sort of psychological profiling. And I think you raise a very good point about different cultures. And, in large organizations, you'd work with colleagues in Japan or the US, sometimes very high contact, sometimes very low contact society. And how do you get them to communicate in an effective way? Because sometimes people get very frustrated, with all of the discussion. But actually, I think what I've learned is that discussion is important. It's not actually so much the discussion, it's the fact that people are, and I think Cathie said this, generating the trust, right? It's a way of building trust and bonding. So in Japanese culture, it is very important that you go out and you socialize with people. In the UK, we can do that, but it's not seen as part of the job there. So, but that's important because you're actually forming some sort of trust, relationship with your work colleagues. And I think it's understanding that, and that can be very culturally different. And I think being able to understand those different cultures and why these things happen, it's not a waste of time. To those people, it's a very important thing, and just realizing and understanding that and integrating that.
Yeah. Tom, can I just raise one point around change?
Yes.
And thank you for raising that, Flic, because it's critical, and you raised some brilliant points there. One thing I'd like to just add on that is change obviously can be great opportunities. It can be very distressing and it can be very stressful for people. The one thing that I just like to throw out there is in terms of when change is happening kind of around you, with you and to you, I would always say very much focus on what actions you can take and stop wasting loads of time on wishing other people would do other things or waiting for other people to do other things. You have no control over that. It will take your energy to a crazy place, but really focus. The change is happening. You are part of it. If you don't want to be part of it, there's a very clear decision you can make. And sometimes that's right. But if you're going to stay and you're going to be part of that change, focus on your actions and again, do them well and be part of it.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to leave some time for questions. There's just one point that I wanted to make very quickly, just tying together some of this, building on Flic, what you were talking about adapting to your environment, about reliability, you talked about, Cathie. In my experience, there's no shortcut to career success. I think, the idea that you can hack your career and become successful easily is a bit of a fallacy. I think, amidst all the noise we heard, particularly last year around quiet quitting and for the gamers among you, min-maxing, I don't know anybody who's been successful in anything without doing the work. And that applies today as much as it applied 10 years ago and 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Even, people point at social media influencers and people like that. They work extremely hard. You don't see a lot of it, but the ones who are very successful, they work extremely hard. And so, as an employer, the thing that always impresses me the most in people is discretionary effort and doing more than is expected with enthusiasm. It's not to say you have to give up your entire life for work, of course not, but over deliver, and your success in your career, whether you work for someone else, whether you're in a big company, small company, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a solo professional, your success will be directly related to the amount of value you create for other people. And so I just wanted to put that out there because I've had this conversation with several people over the last year or so. So I want to take some questions. We have one in the chat here, but please do contribute them here if there's anything you'd like to ask any of the panel, whether it's directly or as a whole. So the first question I have here, and that's the chat button at the bottom of your screen, by the way, is how important is it to work in more than one environment when building a career, whether that's different companies or mixing big and small companies, academia and industry, international companies and domestic. How important is that variety of experience, do you think?
I mean, I might jump in there, I think, to respond to Tony. I think it's very important. I mean, when I was a young lad, which is a long time ago, basically you either went into academia or you went into pharma. And once you made that decision, that was it pretty much. It was very difficult to go back. I think there's a lot of porosity or whatever the word is, people jumping around, and I think that's a very good thing, because I think different stages of the career, and you understand, if you're a CRO, you understand who you're working for and what motivates them and vice versa. I think that's really important to do that, and I think also, when I can say this, got to be best interest, as those of us who are later on in our career, there's always something new to learn and do. Now, we're not written off at 60. We're just beginning to be the most productive we've ever been. So I think having not saying, well, if you haven't in academia got a 20 peer-reviewed papers by the age of 35, your academic career is over, is so 1960s, and hopefully people are beginning to think in a different way.
Yeah. I would say is don't change for change's sake, right? So change for a reason. So, you need to go where you're going to get your next opportunity and you're going to learn new things and grow. So I think it's look for that, whether it's inside the same organization or whether it is, Mark says, jumping between academia and industry. It's what are you going to get from this that's going to build on what you've done before? And is that going to take you in a direction you're kind of interested in going? And for a lot of people, I would say it will be moving across and around for sure. But if you're getting loads of experiences where you are, then I wouldn't say change for change's sake, because you don't know what you're moving into either. So, you know, just be thoughtful about it. And just as long as you're continuing to grow and build on your knowledge and experience in a progressive way, I'd focus pretty much on that.
I would say that you have to look at where you are sometimes. So it's valuable to be in different environments, but not valuable to spend 2 years here, year and a half there, 2 years somewhere else, 2 years somewhere, because you do have to recognize that it takes quite some time to adapt to where you are. And
Yes.
when I'm interviewing, I get quite nervous when I see people who've moved around so much that they haven't actually got grounded anywhere in the environment they're in. But nonetheless, we have in tranScrip a lot of people who have big pharma, service sector and biotech experience over a 15-20 year period. And that is enormously valuable to us, because
Yes.
they understand how different those environments are. And it's valuable to our clients too. So I think it's very important, but don't, as Cathie says, don't just go because you think you need some other kind of experience for some reason.
Just a question on that, Flic, which I think might be helpful perspective for people, because I think people often misunderstand this. You mentioned that when you see someone who's jumped around quite a lot, that makes you a little bit nervous when you're interviewing them. But why is that? What is it that makes you nervous about that?
I think because quite often it's because people get frustrated in the environment they're in, and sometimes they actually even express that in an interview, which is not good news from my perspective, because I don't want to be the person in a year and a half's time who actually felt I wasn't up to the mark either, or my group or team. So I think that there are often reasons why people have to move more frequently than other reasons, and some people, because they've moved from one country to another, find themselves, and you know, I'm not averse to having people who do that, but it will always make me look, and especially if the person that I'm interviewing explains that away by being critical of the previous organization.
Yeah, so it's not to say that people should stay in a toxic environment and things like that, but it's if there's a pattern developing.
Exactly.
Yes,
there are and we all know that there are some environments that are toxic, and I am more as sympathetic as anybody around that sort of thing. But when it becomes a pattern, rather than one or two, then the vast majority of pharma environments are not toxic.
Yeah. And we have a follow-up question to this, which I think is probably going to put an interesting spin on it. So Melissa has asked, equally, should you be wary of people who've stayed at the same company for years and years?
Depends what the job is.
Exactly, yes. And I mean, I think that's something that has changed dramatically over time. When I started out, people stayed in the same university or the same company. I mean, I think when I was at Pfizer, people would join from school at 14 or 16 and stay through to 65. And that was seen, they were the biggest local employer down in Sandwich by a huge margin. And, if people who lived in Canterbury, as I did, you either work for Pfizer or the university. There wasn't anything else to do. Obviously, that whole world has changed. And I think, moving to Cambridge, there was a cluster, right? So, if company A fails or you get sold or whatever, you can move to company B. There was a sort of de-risking. And I think the new de-risking in the modern world, and we're doing it right now, is actually you can work in virtual clusters all around the world, right? And I think what's happened is when the pandemic hit, we were all talking over each other. We were rather clunky. We weren't so good, and we've sort of adapted to this. So I do think there is sort of dynamism there, which just was not available before. But I think you're going back to, I think, Flic and Cathie's point, and your points, Tom, is I think people can move around, but there has to be a rationale, a reason, but there has to be a narrative behind it. it can't just be because I got bored or I fell out with person. I mean, that may happen, and it does happen, but there has to be some sort of rationale behind the change. You know, there is a career pathway which straddles multiple companies and multiple employers. I think that's absolutely fine. But, you know, likewise, in a large organization, particularly very large organizations, you can stay with the same employer, but you can do a huge variety of different jobs.
Yes, true.
Yeah, so I would say it's get under the skin of it rather than, you know, a CV kind of tells you in a chronological order, if, or depending on how creative someone's been in doing it, but they tell you what they've been doing. So, you know, what I would say is, so over the last 2 or 3 years, what are the few impactful things you want to tell me about? And you talk about what's their journey, what have they done, what's their contribution, and what are you bringing to this organization? What's the difference you can make to us? Then you find out about the real person and what they've done. And rather than worrying about whether they've been somewhere 2 years or 20 years, it's more about the so what of the journey.
Yeah, so those things are things to ask questions about. The point is to ask a question, right, rather than make a decision just based on what you see. Yeah, makes sense.
And I think that narrative is called a curriculum vitae in English. Well, the UK English. it is basically it's the story, it's the narrative, it's the how you've done it. And I think you can weave that story within a large or a small organization, multiple organizations.
Yes, I'm afraid we're out of time, almost. So thank you so much for joining us, all three of you. It's been really great to talk to you about this. Thank you to the audience for listening and for your questions, and we hope it was useful. I'm going to pass back to Jazz.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom and Cathie, Flic and Mark. It was a really interesting session. Some really great skills and advice has come out of this. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to everybody that attended our first session of Building Life Science Adventures. Hopefully you'll join us at 10:30 for what is the earning potential in life sciences. It would be great to see you there. Please familiarise yourself with the app. There's lots of opportunities to network with people, ask questions on the dashboard. There's lots of on-demand content, and we also have voting is open for the Life Sciences Inspiration of the Year award until tomorrow lunchtime. So please make sure you go and vote if you haven't done already. And thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.